internet friends! Welcome to Tama Bites, a series where instead of taking a look at an entire game or a broader aspect of the franchise, we zoom way in on one element of game design and how that helps build the RPG adventure aspect of Pokemon games. Today we're taking a bite out of the credits of Scarlet and Violet and what that can tell us about the game's development. This video will not contain spoilers of Scarlet and Violet at all, or really any game footage except for the names scrolling in the credits. So you can rest easy if you're trying to avoid spoilers. So Pokémon Scarlet and Violet are probably the buggiest main series games released in a long time. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are buggy too, but not quite in the same way where the performance issues are extremely noticeable from the word go, and impact major areas of the game. In my playthrough, I've thankfully not actually noticed all that major slowdown that a lot of other people are reporting. But I have had the game crash 3 times, and experienced glitches like getting trapped in walls and needing to be warped out of them by the game, and a graphical error where evolving a Pokemon after defeating a Titan duplicates that Pokemon on the screen, and that one has happened to me twice. I've also had shadows flickering on and off, pop-in during cutscenes, and the camera getting stuck in buildings. And this was all within the first day of playing. So something I was pretty curious about was the credits of the game. I wanted to see who worked on it and where they came from if possible, and things like that. This won't tell the whole, or really even part of the story of development, but it may give us some insight in some way. So I took a look at the credits of the game and looked up as many names as I could, and this is what I found. Note that I don't work in the game industry, so I may misuse terms. This isn't me doing this on purpose, it just comes from not working in the industry and not knowing the lingo. I don't know if there's a big difference internally between terms like game designer and game developer, so if I get something wrong, I'm not trying to mislead anybody. I'm just an extremely loud fan doing my best to understand what I'm looking at. Feel free to do your own research if you feel like it. The credits are available to anyone who finishes the game. With all that said, I'll do my best to summarize what I found. There are hundreds of people who worked on this game across various departments, so please keep in mind that some of this is a generalization. More detailed information can be found by looking at the credits and looking up each person for more accurate information. It looks like a majority of the department heads in each section, the people listed as leads, are longtime Game Freak staff dating back at least to the DS era. The people working under them are a mixture of Game Freak, Nintendo, and contract workers. I found one guy in field and event programming, Toshikazu Niihori, who possibly worked on one of my least favorite games of all time, Rugrats Totally Angelica. Although it is possible that they just share a name with a different programmer and it's not the same guy. For the most part though, it looks like a lot of the staff are contract workers from several different outsourcing agencies. Creek and River Co. Limited, C&R Creative Studios, Extreme Co. Limited, Fellowship Co. Limited, and eSmile Co. Limited are all staffing and recruiting agencies that pull programming and creative talent from across Asia. This is consistent with the rest of the past Pokemon games on the Switch, as it looks like they've been outsourcing at least parts of each game for a long time. But overall, these agencies are listed in more departments in this game than past games like Legends Arceus. It's not known who in the credits came from what agency, but it seems like a lot of the names listed here only have credits on past Switch Pokemon games, or sometimes no previous industry credits at all that I could find. One of the things that I personally found interesting were the number of names that were also credited on Legends Arceus, which I was under the impression was developed by a different team simultaneously with Scarlet and Violet. That to me does not actually seem to be the case here with so many names credited on both games. There are a few notable non-Game Freak leads in a couple of departments too, however. The lead listed for battle system programming, Hiroki Shintani, has credits on several past Shin Megami Tensei games. I've never played a Shin Megami Tensei game, so this does not mean very much to me personally, but these games are brought up a lot in the comments in my videos, so I thought I would mention it in case anybody else found it interesting. In addition to this guy, there are a few other people in the credits that have worked on Shin Megami Tensei games, and also a few other people who have worked on Persona games. The lead listed for 3D map graphics, Noriko Uono, was also an artist that worked on landscapes for Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Furthermore, in the field map design section of the credits, several of the names listed here are also credited on Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. My guess is that they work with this company listed here, 7 Dreams Inc., which is also credited on Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Scarlet Nexus, New Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Breath of the Wild. When I looked up Noriko Uono, there's a Nintendo wiki page that describes her as an artist for Monolith. So I was under the impression that she works for Monolith, but when I posted about her on Twitter, a bunch of people argued that she has nothing specifically to do with Monolith and is instead a freelance artist that works on a ton of Nintendo games. I have no idea how to verify either claim, so I will just leave it at these people here have overlapping credits with other games that were developed by Monolith. And I'm not going to make any claims about who they were actually employed by. They worked on those games is what I'm saying. Under debug and game programming partners, Digital Hearts Co. Limited is listed. That's a mouthful, which is the debugging house used for a majority of recently published Nintendo titles. Among the many games that they're credited on are Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Sword and Shield, and Splatoon 3. I couldn't find anything in the credits about overall quality assurance. There just seemed to be localization QA for each language, and QA for specific departments, so that one I am less sure about. Overall, ignoring the number of people who worked on various global localization teams, around 500 individual names are listed in these credits. I had to count them myself, and I'm not that great with numbers, but I think, rounding up, it comes close to 500. According to a Forbes article from 2016, Miyamoto summarized Breath of the Wild as having over 300 people listed in the credits. So Scarlet and Violet had a similar sized, if not bigger team than other similar Nintendo open world games had. So since we've established that there is some overlap in staff, with the game that I have most seen Scarlet and Violet compared to, and comparable team size, there are a couple different possible explanations for why the games are so different in terms of quality and polish. One could be management. Unfortunately, I don't have a look behind the scenes, so I have no way of knowing if there was a management problem during the development of these games. It's possible that everyone who worked on this game is completely a pro and they all coordinated flawlessly, or it's also possible that no one was talking to each other the entire time and they were all constantly confused about what they were actually making. To me, enough works about the game on a design and execution level that I think that that's not super likely, but I'm not a developer and not an authority, so I don't really know any better than you probably do. The other possible explanation is that they just didn't have enough time, and that one we have plenty of evidence to support. Pokémon has a unique production schedule compared to most of the other open world Nintendo games that I've seen these games compared to. The start of a new generation of Pokémon kicks off the new season of the anime, which has corresponding merchandise, an entire trading card game to support, a whole fleet of mobile games, and so on and so forth. There is a huge chain of production involved in the Pokémon franchise. And it's not that Game Freak has absolutely no say in how much time they get, but when they commit to a deadline, the whole production line of content and merchandise gears up to correspond with release. So they don't have the luxury of saying, oh, we calculated wrong and need more time to finish the game. Compare that to Breath of the Wild, which began production in 2013, with a scheduled release date of 2015, which ended up delayed all the way into 2017. And it was released for a completely different additional console than it was announced for. We can assume that Scarlet and Violet got about 3 years of development time if development began as soon as Sword and Shield were released. But that apparently also includes splitting a huge number of staff with Legends Arceus for some reason. A much more appropriate point of comparison, rather than Breath of the Wild, is actually the Madden series games, because they're also tied into an enormous franchise and made on a timeline mostly out of the developer's control. And every other one of those games released is a buggy, unplayable mess. So I guess that's a pretty solid example of the challenges of developing an entire video game on a limited timeline as part of a larger franchise. Almost all of the issues with the game as it is now are pretty evident of a lack of time to polish it up and optimize it for the system. It doesn't feel rushed with a lack of content or anything. In my opinion, they prioritized the correct things, but they didn't have the time they clearly needed to clean the game up and get it ready to be seen and played by people. In the middle of cutscenes and rooms, there are Pokeballs embedded in the floor that are clearly visible, which are objects used during debugging. They didn't even have time to simply move these out of the way to places where people wouldn't see them. In earlier trailers of Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon that are close to the player display with reduced quality models and limited animation cycles, which is a technique used during development to help with performance before they've had time to optimize the engine to run smoothly on the hardware. In the final version of PLA, contrasted to the trailer, this is used only for Pokemon that are way in the distance, and higher quality models and more fluent animations are used for Pokemon once they get within a certain range of the player. In Scarlet and Violet, everything uses the lower quality models and reduced animation frames super close to the player still, which is what I think a lot of people are mistaking for slowdown. That's not to say there isn't also real slowdown happening, but this is particularly noticeable at the very beginning of the game in the classrooms, which makes a pretty terrible first impression. Additionally, the camera in Pokemon Legends Arceus actually has proper collision, and it doesn't get stuck inside of objects or clip through the ground constantly. But this game doesn't have that yet. I don't think anyone who worked on this game said, Yeah, this is ready to go out the door as is. Almost all of the issues with the game, in my opinion, are due to a lack of time to get things smoothed out and working cohesively. And since we've seen many of these same people work on previous games in the genre that are not plagued with these issues, I think we can at least rule out that there aren't enough talented people being put on these projects. It's a shame because Scarlet and Violet are the culmination of a lot of tweaking and growing this series has been doing for a long time. And these are the first Pokemon games in like 10 years that I feel like this is all working together really well in a way that's super fun and fulfilling. It's just also buggy as hell and makes a terrible first impression. And it's also the product of a pretty obvious unsustainable crunch problem that may have always been there but is now especially apparent as these games are ballooning in scope. I asked my friends outside of my usual Pokemon nerd circle if they were planning to get this game, and they said no, they're boycotting it because of the clearly poor working conditions the developers had to deal with. So I hope that the negative press these games are getting actually makes an impact, and that somehow something changes for the better about how these games are produced. But my goal with this video isn't to say that I know how to solve this problem moving forward, but rather to demonstrate how useful it can be to look at the credits to get more of an idea of who's actually working on the game. Following my Pokemon Coliseum video, I got a lot of replies from people who said that they wish the people who made Coliseum XD and Battle Revolution worked on the Switch games. But there's actually a pretty similar story going on over there. The product manager listed in the Pokemon 3D modeling and animation section on Pokemon Battle Revolution's credits, Misamichi Anazawa, is also listed as a product manager for Pokemon Legends Arceus and Ultra Sun Ultra Moon. The lead listed in the same section for modeling and animation on PBR is Atsuko Ujiie, who is also credited as an art director on Pokemon Legends Arceus, and Pokemon 3D modeling art director on Pokemon Sword and Shield. The art director on Battle Revolution was James Turner, who was also the art director for Sword and Shield. So there is some overlap in staff in the animation department between the two games, and the talent pool is not necessarily the reason that people are unsatisfied with the animations in the recent Switch games. There's some useful information in the credits of games if you look for it, and we'll be looking at the subject again in more detail in future videos, especially since outsourcing plays a huge role throughout Pokemon history if you know where to look. I decided today, while I ask people to subscribe and hit that bell icon and send me more suggestions for future Tama Bites, that I'll also do a little show and tell. This is my rare and strange Real Action Heroes Ash and Pikachu figure from the 10th anniversary in 2006. It's got a little comic on the inside of the door. I pet sat for my neighbors to earn the $60 that this thing cost new, and there are only 1,500 that exist in the entire world. He has fabric removable clothes just like a real doll. His hat even turns around, I think. And look at those abs!